So, I'm addressing a topic that, in addition to facts and realities, it is further enriched and complicated by historical influences, stereotypes, beliefs, misconceptions, embedded with both our people. That is the relationship between Greece and Germany. It has part of the discussion we have already done. But first things. In a nutshell, what I'm going to cover in this talk is the following. A brief summary of the 6-year-old crisis that may seem to wane in Europe, but not in Greece, in its origins and the EU's collective response. B, follow with what Greece has done during those years and what is currently doing, that is after the January 25th elections. Then, C, discuss certain issues that have shaped the influence of our respective psyche, and D, conclude with what I consider is the way forward. Since the European issues are very complicated, I mean, it is almost impossible to understand how this thing works if you are not a European, not a member of a European Parliament, but within the institutions. I'll try to speak as simply as possible. First, a few words about the European crisis. We have been experiencing a global economic crisis, started back in 2008. It started from the United States of America, and it triggered one of the sharpest economic downturns in the European history. This global crisis, largely due to the role of the financial markets, is, to my mind, a consequence of limited and ineffective oversight by politics. Again, what I said about the global governance, the international institutions. Indeed, we may say that we have come close to a market-driven democracies rather than democratically regulated markets. The role of the markets in this crisis was the main one. The systemic flaws of the European Monetary Union architecture and its shortcomings compounded the crisis. So first it was the issue of the way that the markets worked without a political driving, and then it was the architecture of the monetary union, the euro architecture. Last but not least, each country had its own peculiar problematic behaviors, or should I say, imprudent practices that fueled the fire even further. The island had the problem of the banks. Greece has the excessive borrowing and spending like there was no tomorrow attitude. In Spain, it was the problem of the private debt. In each country, in each of the countries of the crisis, there was a particular problem, but we have to admit it was a problem of bad national governance. The consequences of the crisis. We speak about the crisis 6 years now. The consequences were economic, were social, a lot of pain, a lot of poverty, and there was as well political consequences, because in all countries, even in Germany, which were not badly affected, but well affected by the crisis, there were political consequences. New parties, Uli has already spoken about one anti-Islamic party, anti-European party, and a lot of anti-Europeanism. The crisis revealed the institutional weakness of the European Union and of the Eurozone shortcomings. In a few words, in a clear words, we could say that we understood very well that we cannot have one currency and 18 different economies. And we had to manage it as soon as possible. So how did we handle the crisis at European level? In these 4 years, the last 4 years, the European Council, the European Commission, the European Bank, and here I would like, for those who do not know, to explain that the European Council is the council of the head of governments in each country, 27 European leaders. The European Commission is a kind of a European government. And as you know, the European Central Bank is an independent, very strong European institution. They have all tried in unprecedented ways to operate in the legal limits of the treaties. And they did it because in a few months, in zero time for the European experience, they created new mechanisms, they agreed in new institutions, and even they decided to give special emphasis on the ECB's QE, quantitative easing. That means to give money in the national markets, which could change the situation we knew at the European level. There was a main ideological and political plan, and it was what it has been called in whole Europe the austerity plan. It has been implemented in the countries of the South particularly, but not only, and it worked in many of them. And when I'm saying it worked, it means that they are okay now with the fiscal consolidation and they are back to the markets. It does not mean that they have solved the problems of unemployment, of poverty, or of the dissemination of social goods. So in Portugal, in Ireland, in Spain, and in Cyprus, we have clear signs of recovery with unemployment finally falling 1 or 2 points, and there is a restoration of the capital markets. What happened in Greece? Now, in the May of 5th, we have the 5th anniversary of the bailout of Greece and the beginning of adjustment programs. What we have achieved in Greece? During these 5 years, there was a huge achievement concerning the fiscal consolidation. In 2011, in 2010, the deficit in Greece was 15%, and in 2013, it was 4%. There was no precedent in the economic history. It was the first time that we had such a level of consolidation, of fiscal consolidation. It was an achievement. Everybody said, yes, this is exactly what Greece has to do. But what was the result? 25% unemployment, 50% unemployment in young people, youth unemployment 50%, 60% in young female unemployment, 23% of Greeks living at risk of poverty in 2013. I could give you many numbers, but an interesting one, which has to do with young people, 100,000 scientists now are working abroad. It is the famous brain drain. Yet, after 6 years of recession in the economy, something moved, and there was a change, and the unemployment started to fall, of course, from 25% to go to 23%, but something, there was a sign of a change. And then we had the political destabilization and public anger. And I think that everybody can understand public anger in a society with such a level of unemployment. And just keep in mind that we can see many other countries in Balkans, in Africa, in Asia, that there is a huge number of unemployment, but it is completely different when you have a society who is in a very low levels of prosperity, and all of a sudden, in 2 years, there is a fall 25% in GDP, 35% in salaries and pensions, and these huge numbers of unemployment. What happened in Greece in 5 years was a political landscape of instabilization, of destabilization. Between 2009 and 2015, Greece held 4 general elections, 2 elected and 2 appointed prime ministers, and 6 ministers of finance. Most worrying of all was the electoral support for the extreme right neo-Nazi party, Golden Dawn, a bit over 6%. Nobody could imagine that in a country like Greece, so much suffered by the Nazi regime, would have a Nazi party. Then we had the elections in the 25th of January. I think for political scientists, the Greek case is very interesting, because in 3 years, a small party, a small radical leftist party, from 4%, it was for years 4% in the election, suddenly, all of a sudden in 3 years, from 4%, it went to 36%. And all the other mainstream parties were really destroyed. So something very deep has happened in the society. People didn't believe, didn't expect anything from the mainstream parties. I belong to each one of these parties, and people wanted something completely different and completely new. So Syriza gained the elections in 25th of January, this January, and it is 4 months in power. Syriza, this leftist party, came to power promising harder negotiations with the European Union and with the institutions, and promising almost everything that people wanted to hear. So now we are in a very difficult situation, that there is a deadlock in the negotiations because the government cannot go ahead, cannot do what they have promised in the elections, and the Europeans do not want to hear anything but what they have done and agreed with the previous governments. The situation is very difficult in the society, and nobody knows exactly what is going to go on. Now there are negotiations and negotiations, and a very hot situation within the society. Of course, in these cases, when there is poverty, when there is no hope, there is a lot of demagogy. And in politics, demagogy has some very common in all countries and in all periods principles. Demagogy means that I create an enemy, so I have somebody to fight. Demagogy means that I always carry the ears of people and explain how right they are and how bad the others are. And demagogy means that I never make some critics for myself, but it is always the others who are responsible for what happens to me. So these were parts of what the Greek demagogy had, some of the factors that created this political rhetorics that we have today. Who was the enemy? For years, in each country, there is always somebody that they have to fight. For Greece, because of the Greek dictatorship, which has been supported by the United States, the enemy was the Americans. Now, the enemy is the Germans. And this is why I would like to speak about the relationship between the Greeks and the Germans. And I would like to explain it in the context of this crisis and to be as objective as I can, because, of course, there is not anything particular between the Greeks and the Germans as it is between the Greek and the Italians, even concerning the Second World War, which had been forgotten for years and years, and nobody was speaking on that. We had war with the Italians, we had with the Bulgarians, we had with the Turks. Why now there is so much discussion about the Germans? Before I am starting to speak on this issue, I would like just to tell you that a few years ago, in 2009, 2008, if you asked a Greek who is our best friend in Europe, I think the majority would speak about Germans, because there were millions of Greeks who had been in Germany after the war. They have worked here, they have made their families, they have made their own business. They were very well accepted by the society. There were millions of tourists, of German tourists, who were coming every year to Greece. They had an excellent time, excellent experiences. There were so many students in the German universities, so there was really no problem. And of course, the war is always an issue, and there were terrible things which have happened during the war in Greece. But they were not anymore in the memories of the new generation in a way that poisoned the friendship between the two countries. Before going to what happens now in our days, and maybe in links and in contact with what we said, let me say a few things about history. Let us have a closer look in our respective countries that do share a rich web of ties and connections, along with some fundamental differences. Although Greece is considered the cradle of Western civilization, the nation has had a different history and trajectory from the main countries of Western Europe. Greece, unlike most Western European nations, was under foreign rule for centuries, under Ottoman Turks, in an empire that stretched from Northwest Africa to Persia, to Hungary, with large tracts of Southeastern Europe and the Near East in between. The modern Greek state was only one small part of the vast Turkish empire. It gained liberation and its independence in 1829. Therefore, we have to bear in mind that Greece has not experienced all the ideological movement that formed Western Europe. There has been no Renaissance, there has been no Enlightenment. In that period, we had the Turkish Empire. Greece shares common cultural and ethnic traits with other southern and eastern countries, especially with the Balkans. It also shares cultural and ethnic traits with countries in the Middle East and the Mediterranean region. These are crucial elements of Greece's political and economical culture, along with religion that distinguish Greece from Western Europe. And then I will give you an interesting example, because religion is not, Greek people are not religious in terms of going to the church. Neither Germans are not religious in going to the church, but religion through centuries has created a culture concerning work, punishment, relationship, expression, feelings. Greece is a border country between East and West, literally. And that has marked the core identity of the Greeks. Is it Eastern or Western? ancient or modern. Greece is at the borders of the so-called East and West. That is exactly where its uniqueness lies. It has served, and still does so, as a crossroads amongst three continents, and historically, peoples of various social and cultural backgrounds. Thus, Greek identity is an amalgam of all those elements. That unique geography and history made us, the Greeks, feel isolated, difficult to identify with the others. In a constant state of threat, we have always in our history the fear that somebody threats us, and with no sense of belonging in a larger family. One of the main strategic goals of being part of the European Union was exactly the cultivation of that feeling with benefits and responsibilities that stem from such belonging to a greater union of nations. Indeed, despite the hardship of recent years, Greeks, even today, with so many problems and European movements in many countries in Europe, Greeks are pro-Europeans and still overwhelmingly support and want to continue Greece to be part of the Eurozone. Now, when it comes to German, we may want to say and admit that Greeks have a love-hate relation with the Germans. On the one hand, they admire German discipline, effectiveness, and thoroughness, and adored German products, I might say. On the other hand, they could not conform with the Protestant work ethic, seriousness, discipline, austerity. However, as I told you in the beginning, just a few years ago, in 2004, every Greek loved and admired and identified himself with King Otto, the Hangel, the famous coach in the football. And one of the most popular ads, advertisements in the TV, was claiming every Greek needs his German. This was a very well-famous advertisement, and it meant that a Greek needs a German in order to support him to be more well-organized, more productive, more effective. And it was a common saying every day. If you say it today, you are dead. Now, Germans traditionally have been the most ardent admirers of ancient Greece. The idea of Greece has operated in the Western imagination as an ideal, a source, an origin of identity and a cultural model since the late of the 16th century. Greek tragedy, in particular, was a German fixation for all the German greats. Hegel, Schelling, Hölderlin, Wagner, Nietzsche, Heidegger, all of them had as basis the Greek philosophy. Indeed, many of the greatest German minds, such as Immanuel Kant, Sigmund Freud, Goethe, to name just a few, based their thoughts and they wrote a lot about the classical Greek values. The first king of Greece, what do you believe that was the first Greek of Greece? A German. Otto, Prince of Bavaria. His father, Ludwig, was so passionate about Greek antiquity that he transformed his capital, Munich, into an Athens of the North. Germany has always been in the center of Europe throughout the centuries. It was the geography, of course. If there is one characteristic that defines the German nation, it is Entschlossenheit. Do I say it in a correct way? Which means a single-minded determination and resolve. Germans are used to federalism. The decentralized domestic political structure imposed on Germany by the Allies, where power where power is divided between local, state, and federal government, facilitate and familiarized the notion. German people are consistently pro-European, and since they have the knowledge and the experience of the way their federal system works, they understand very well the way that the European Union works. Described as the sick man of Europe in 1999, Germany now, after reforming itself, appears to have the continent's strongest as well as biggest economy. It accounts for a fifth of the European Union's output and a quarter of its exports. The German question about the role of a country too big for Europe and too small for the world, as Henry Kissinger famously put it, is back on the agenda. What is the role of Germany? And how the country and how Germans feel about it. Obviously, the most important place to look for explanation is history. The shadows of the past still influence collective political consciousness. Germans are deeply ambivalent about their growing role in Europe and talking about leadership. The Euro crisis is problematic for German politicians because it brings powerful historical forces of reluctance to lead, desire for European integration, and fear of instability into the present. I would like to bring to your attention an important issue that I believe has negative contribution and deep adverse effects. I'm stressing this because this is the time for all parties to display greater understanding for one another's position. In Greece, there was a need of reform. To be frank, there was a need of dozens of reforms. We knew very well in 2009 that we had to change everything in our country. There was a need to change the mentality of the entire nation, to change the mechanism, the institutions, the political system. But you cannot change a country in 3 years without taking into consideration its customs, the ways of thinking, its sensitivities. If you do it, if you don't take it into consideration, you cannot have results. The issue between the German and Greek political system has to do with the behavior and the perceived or real Germany's misguided policies and arrogant approach to Greece's problems. I remember that I was in the government in 2012, and it was a pre-electoral period, and all of a sudden, Mr. Schäuble gave an interview, and with his finger like that, sent the Greeks what they have to do, and sent the Greek political parties what they had to do. At that day, I made a public statement, and I said, today, Mr. Schäuble proved that is the best friend of Syriza. Syriza will take 10 points because of Mr. Schäuble. And this was the result, because no nation accepts from politicians from other nations, even if they are right, if they say the right things, to point their finger and to say what to do. So what I'm saying and insisting, I have said it many times in European fora, is that the problem with the German attitude is not so much the real position and the plan and the proposals. Many of them are 100% right, many of them. It is the lack of emotional intelligence, how to work with the others. What happened with this kind of interventions justified and fueling demagogy and undermined many times the efforts of reforms. Of course, I am not pretending that this was the reason for failure in many areas, but it is true that the way that the two political systems communicated was a real failure. On the one side, we have a demagogy, we have populism, and on the other side, we had the feeling of arrogance against a small and poor and with many problems country. So we are in front of a very difficult situation when we have real problems, we have communications problems, we have cultural problems, and it is very important for the leaders, because it is a leaders' issue, to work together in a different way. I will finish with something, and I took it because I knew that more of you, the majority of you are students and master students on political sciences and economic issues. And I would like to give you a very interesting example how the cultural and the religious culture works in economy. I read a fantastic article before Easter in The Guardian. It was very big. I made it 2 paragraphs, and I'll read it to you. It says, last month we celebrated the title is The Easter and the Issue of Debt. Last month we celebrated Orthodox Easter at a different date than the other denominations. At that time, I read this article that I'm going to read for you. The author describes 2 completely different religious views, Eastern and Western, and claims that they support 2 contrasting moral worldviews and different attitudes towards economic in general and capitalism in particular. I quote, indeed, the respective current attitudes towards debt of the Greek and German governments can be seen to a remarkable extent to track the Eastern-Western split over the meaning of Easter. I suppose that all you know what the Easter for Christians is. Yes. For Westerns, Jesus comes to receive the punishment that is due to us and is crucified, thus repaying the debt on our behalf and leveling our account. Redemption, remember, is an economic metaphor. For Eastern theologians, Jesus' mission is to break human beings free from the imprisonment to death. All the important action happens at the resurrection, not the crucifixion. The emphasis is on Christ leaping from the grave, not hanging on a cross. So, the Germans want to punish somebody who has made something bad, and to have a debt is something bad, so you have to punish. Greece wants to leap free from death, dealing debt. So they want to, in a theological way, to be free from their debt. Germany wants that the debt must be paid back, no matter how much blood and pain is involved. I think you will agree with me, of course in exaggerating a lot, that it certainly rings familiar bells. Germany is now a big country with big responsibilities. It will be judged by how it lives up to them, how it leads, how it serves its leading role. Undeniably, Germans today are deeply reluctant to assume the responsibilities of hegemony. Leadership is what is required. Both Greeks and Germans need to demonstrate deeper emotional intelligence and thus transcend our mutual weakness. Next weeks will be very important for Greece. They will be very important because we have to finalize the negotiations. We know very well that we live in a union with rules, and we have to respect the rules. And I can assure you that the majority, according to the polls, 68%, 70% of people say, yes, we want to live in Europe and we want to respect the rules and we have a final agreement with the European Union, 70%. I hope and I believe that the government, although they are unexperienced and they have some totally different ideas, they will accept and respect the people's will. But it is true that everybody has a big responsibility in the European family. We cannot go on with this kind of program. It is a program that it cannot be implemented, and in the way it has been implemented, it had huge failures, so we need some changes, and all parts have to understand each other. I think there is, and I believe there exists, a willingness to listen, a willingness to understand each other, and to continue, live together with common values, visions, being taught by our ancient Roman Enlightenment and Renaissance past. It is our common European past, because this is Europe, this is for what Europe is proud for its history, and I hope in the future. And I very much believe that there will be a common destiny. Thank you.